Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Happy 4th of July. God bless America on this special day. I have a message for all Americans today. As the U.S. celebrates Independence Day, the day of freedom, please remember that this day in history was only a beginning in freedom for this nation. The freedom that God desires for all Americans, for all people, was not fully perfected or fulfilled by the Declaration of July 4th, 1776. On the contrary, this declaration was only a preparation for a greater or more perfect freedom that God wills for all Americans in His providential plan of salvation for the people of the United States of America. What is this perfect freedom? What is this greater freedom that God wills for us? This perfect freedom is freedom in Christ as a nation. This freedom is neither perfected in a legal declaration, nor in public opinion, nor in winning a war, nor in acquiring land or in riches. Human beings such as Americans can have all those good things, but remain in slavery to sin. As such, the true freedom in Christ that God desires for this nation is fulfilled in the heart of Americans through God's grace. And more specifically, the freedom that God desires for us can only be received in our hearts, received in our lives by cooperating with the grace that God offers us, the grace that Christ merited for us on the cross. Every American, every human being living in America is called to freely offer himself completely to Christ from his heart, including his mind, his will, his passions, all that he is and all that he has, as an act of love through a life of virtue, holy virtue. This is a freedom that Christ calls us to. It's a freedom that leads to true happiness, a freedom that leads to true excellence. In fact, this offering of himself in love becomes all the more virtuous, all the more holy and meritorious in suffering. In this sense, the more the American opens his heart to love Christ, the more will he be willing to freely suffer virtuously in him, not only for his spiritual good, but for the spiritual good of all people, indeed for all Americans. This represents the greatest act of freedom for the American, to do God's will in the suffering, to do God's will in the injustices, to do God's will in all the tribulations and trials that we encounter in life. And when we do this, we truly offer our hearts fully to Christ. We love Him as our first love in the crucible of the cross by saying yes to Him in suffering temptations of the flesh, temptations of the world, and temptations of Satan. But in Christ, when we bear these sufferings, these temptations virtuously, we cooperate with God's grace for the good, not only of our own souls, but for the souls of our brothers and sisters, for all Americans, indeed for all peoples. The American becomes increasingly purified, healed, and perfected in the image of Christ as a child of God by making this offering to God, by giving all that he is and all that he has to God in service, especially in the suffering. And all of us know suffering, brothers and sisters. Many of us have suffered in many different ways. But in that suffering, Christ is reaching out to us and calling us to unite our sufferings to His passion for the salvation of souls. Here, the act of the American by truly loving authentically in Christ in the suffering becomes a holy offering to God for the sanctification of sinners. I pray that every American, every person living in the United States says yes to true freedom, to the freedom for excellence, the freedom in Christ that leads to true happiness through holy virtue. This is the greatness that the United States of America is called to practice daily, because precisely by freely cooperating with God's grace in the sufferings through a life of virtue, we immolate our hearts our wills to the will of the Father in imitation of Christ. And in that act, we truly become free, first and foremost, to love God as our first love and to love our neighbor as ourself. When St. Thomas Aquinas discusses the meaning of true peace, the peace that all of us desires in this nation, he says that true peace is the right ordering of love, the right ordering of divine charity. And so when we are at true peace with each other, and first and foremost with God, there is true peace. And that is when we truly love God with all our heart, with all our mind, with all our soul, with all our strength, and we love our neighbor as ourself. That is the true ordering of love that we call peace, brothers and sisters. And when we truly understand that in loving God first, we offer ourselves, our hearts, our minds, our wills, our passions, all that we are and all that we have. We offer all this to God in imitation of Christ. And in that act, brothers and sisters, there is true peace. Even if there is suffering, even if we must suffer in living a life of virtue, as long as we truly love God as our first love and we love our neighbor as ourselves, there is the true peace that Christ wants for us. But that can only be attained by using our freedom for excellence, by truly living a life of virtue. And at the heart of this true happiness that leads to true peace, brothers and sisters, is our union with the passion of Christ. Christ brought peace to this world. He brought peace to us. He offers that peace to us through his passion, his suffering and death on the cross. And so this also means that to be Christ-like is to imitate Christ in that suffering. It's when we suffer, and we all suffer, many of us in many, many different ways. When we imitate Christ in that suffering, we are truly exercising true freedom in Christ. The true freedom that leads to true peace. Loving God as our first love and loving our neighbors as ourselves. And so, brothers and sisters, let us remember that our true peace, it was neither achieved by the Declaration on July 4th, 1776. It was not achieved by winning a war. It was not achieved by acquiring land or riches. On the contrary, the true peace that Christ wants for us, the perfect peace, it happens in our hearts when we open our hearts to God's grace and cooperate with that grace to love him virtuously. And in that love of God, that love of Christ, we open ourselves to love our neighbors as ourselves. God gives us the grace to do so. And in that is the peace that Christ wants for all of us. That is the independence that he desires for us. The independence not from God, but the independence from sin, the independence from Satan, the independence from evil. And what this also means is that it means that we become utterly and completely dependent upon God in how we live our lives. And so God be with you, brothers and sisters, on this special day of 4th of July. I hope you have a blessed celebration.